Well, I'm joined this time around by Neil Ferris, who's one of the busiest, most respected choral conductors in the UK. Also conducts, of course, lots of distinguished orchestras. And Neil also works around the world, plying his wonderful choral trade. And Neil, welcome to these interviews. Um, we're here to talk about Sancta Civitas, which is being given at the first night of the Proms this year. You've been preparing or are preparing the BBC Symphony Chorus, but we ought to really start with the fact that you are in charge of the music at the Leith Hill Music Festival. In fact, you've just had your very first festival, and I was just wondering whether it's at all intimidating for you to be following in the footsteps of Vaughan Williams, okay, albeit a good while ago. Does his spirit sort of still hover over the festival?
Completely, but in the most benign and wonderful way. Hello, Andrew. Thank you very much for having me, and hello, everybody watching, listening. Yes, it is intimidating, just the weight of history and the sense of responsibility. I'm certainly not blasé about the custodianship that I have of that wonderful festival, and the spirit lives on. I mean, in a number of ways, but I mean the most obvious being the fact that Dorking Halls exists because of Vaughan Williams and the festival, and his statue is outside. They made many attempts to replace the stolen baton each time, and then I think they've given up. But his baton is not in his hand anymore. But yes, there are certain things that are very much similar, and things that have developed over time. But it's over 100 years old, the festival, set up by his sister, in fact. Of course, we must remember that, Margaret, or Meggie as she was known. But in the most wonderful way, in other words, celebrating music, celebrating choral singing, celebrating the fact that a number of village choirs from the vicinity of Dorking itself, Epsom, Leatherhead, Beer Green and Newdigate, all these wonderful smaller choirs get together, compete in the morning, sing together in the afternoon, and perform in the evening all together.
Yeah, you see, that takes me back to my youth, which is now a very long time ago, Neil. When I used to enter, competitive music festivals as a young singer, and that competitive scene, I'm sure it's still alive out there, but it's not so much a part of British musical life as it was. But here you've got the same formula that was adopted in Vaughan Williams' time, roughly speaking, of all these villages, as you say, close to Dorking, coming together and competing with each other. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Well, and exactly, and Margaret and her friend went to Petersfield Music Festival and were so inspired by that they wanted to set up their own. So yes, a celebration of music, celebration of singing in this particular context. I love the changes that my predecessor Jonathan Wilcox made to the competition format. It had just perhaps got a little unrewarding to ask choirs of 20 people to sing the selected passage from the main work and be judged on it when you're singing chunks of the kingdom, as two or three to a part. And Jonathan made the lovely change that is a 15-minute recital, and you choose your own music, and therefore you can choose your own music according to the strengths of your
Yeah.
choir.
Well, of course, the whole competitive sort of idea is that you improve standards. And I wonder, okay, so you've just done this 1 year, and I wonder if it nonetheless was demonstrated to you that standards are improved by competing with other choirs.
I think that's a bigger question. There are many, in Europe, there are wonderful established competitions. I think there have been recently more in the UK as well. There's just been a interculture competition in Hull, for example. And I've been to adjudicate at a couple in Ireland. And I think the concentration it gives towards preparing for a performance really does focus the mind. I think occasional memorization work really does help. Not necessarily it has to be all the time, but just changing up the rhythm and energy maybe of a year, that you're not always just singing from your scores and trying to get it right. Is that you really spend time with the piece, and you're not necessarily just learning that piece, you're learning the skills of learning a piece really well, knowing it completely absorbing it onto your body, that that can often give an extra level in performance as well. So I think it's
Yeah.
it's a great discipline, and I don't think that it's healthy to exist purely for a competition,
Yeah.
but as part of something that is broader, most definitely.
Yeah. So what happens? I mean, in Vaughan Williams's day, it was a sort of, I think it was a 3-day festival at least,
That's right.
and there will be concerts through the day. Now, basically, it's 2 choral concerts, and these competing choirs sort of split. 4 or 5, 6 of them, one concert, and the rest on the other one. And I wonder if there was competition this year. You got one night Will Todd's Passion Music and his Jazz Brevis, and then Elgar's Dream of Gerontius on the other night. I mean, I wonder if there was a little bargaining going on, that people were signing for another choir because they preferred to sing either one or the other.
Well, that's my responsibility, is to actually make sure that each group over time gets a variety. And I'm sure you'd find equal numbers in each group that said, "Oh, I wish I was doing the other one," and an equal number that says, "Thank goodness I'm doing this one." So it is one of those things. You can never please all of the people all of the time. However, if you show them a pattern and begin to gain their confidence that you are thinking about what they might like to be singing over a period of time, then I think you can take people with you.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, we should, for people, perhaps watching this from the other side of the world, just say just a little something about the area of the Surrey Hills in which Dorking and the Dorking Halls venue sits. I mean, this is the most wonderful area of Surrey, and of course, where Vaughan Williams lived, at Leith Hill Place, a sort of miniature country house. So tell us just something about the area, very briefly.
It's rich and it's verdant and it's stunning scenery, but the geography is kind of defined by the hills that almost give a barrier to London, give a barrier to the area around, unless you're carrying on further south. And Vaughan Williams used to cycle around the villages to take the rehearsals, and so therefore all the choirs that compete are in a very small defined area. And I think that's one of its particular strengths, that yes, it's centered on Dorking, but it's very much of the area, and it's therefore a community event.
Yeah.
And to have in total over the weekend over 400 singers taking part in this particular festival for a small geographical area, it's really quite something.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
wonder to behold. But yes, the geography is defined by it, and therefore the rules on competing, you had to be within a certain distance of Dorking, so Vaughan Williams could get round on his bike. I've started driving around them. I reintroduced that idea this year, but I have to confess I drove.
well, yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the barrier to London, and you talk about Vaughan Williams cycling. From my experience, lots of very athletic-looking cyclists don't think of the Surrey Hills as being a barrier at all, and they sort of block the roads as you're trying to cross the hills. But let's not talk about that. Let's move on to this first night of the Proms.
Yeah.
And there's still quite rare performance of, what is it, a 35-minute oratorio by Vaughan Williams, Sancta Civitas. Well, I mean, were you familiar with it before you were told that you would be preparing the BBC Symphony chorus for it?
No, I wasn't. That was apart from knowing what it sounded like, because I mean, we might talk about this in a bit anyway, because of the forces involved meant I haven't had the opportunity to actually prepare the piece. Donna Nobis Pacem, C Symphony, yeah, great, good number of times. But to get to know this work has been a real revelation for me, and that's not a pun intended on the text like that.
Yeah, but it's for many people it's quite a difficult musical language. It's certainly not the Vaughan Williams of the sort of radiant C symphony, the works before the Great War. Just tell us something about it. When was it composed, and how do you think it does relate to the Great War, perhaps?
You'd say about the musical language. One of the rehearsals just the other day, I was talking about wonky scales, and we had to spend some time towards the end. There's a patch towards the end with some that they don't even sit in any mode. Is I as a violinist was used to Prokofiev scales, altered chromaticism in scales, but we had to work very slowly at our wonky scales the other day.
Yeah.
So in terms of where it sits, I mean, there's some angry music, as you said, that might resonate with those who know the Fourth Symphony, in terms of to do with the fall of Babylon and sort of precursor of Belshazzar by.
Yeah, so we're talking about the text from the Book of Revelation, basically, which is apocalyptic.
Yes, and that sense of apocalypse, I think, because of Vaughan Williams's experience in the First World War, he never really got past that, and we in his music, it's not unfair to relate those experiences to whenever we see music of that type. In the early 20s, which is when this is from, early to mid 20s, it was a real golden sort of verdant period for him writing. He revised the Lark Ascendi, and I don't think it's a massive coincidence that it's an utterly gorgeous violin solo towards the end. There was Floss Campi, and the Third Symphony, so the Pastoral Symphony, which very much does have echoes of the First War. And that comes into this music here, as well as elements of Whitman-esque, although it's not a Whitman text, Whitman-esque elements of the First Symphony, the C Symphony, to do with what happens to the soul, the journey of the soul, discovering some mysticism, not necessarily mysticism in terms of completely Holst, but those ideas that are beyond the sort of Judeo-Christian sort of traditional ideas of death and resurrection.
Yeah, so the journey the text takes us through is what we end very radiantly, but it's not very radiant earlier on. So what's actually happening, very briefly, Neil?
It's a depiction of Jerusalem, and where we can go with understanding the beauty of that city, but it's not a straight path. And so when we are singing full out with all the calling of the distant choir, it's the distant choirs has some angry and passionate music in it as well. So it's not an idea of an angelic distant choir. I mean, Britain in War Requiem, the angelic distant choir is not an angelic distant choir. It's actually pointing some fingers. So there's some the frustration and anger in what you'll hear from the gallery on the first night of the Proms. There's a semi-chorus that evokes our need to return to beauty, and there is a full symphony chorus as well. So we've got the BBC singers with us, we've got the BBC symphony chorus, and in the distant choir we've got members of London youth choirs.
How wonderful. And we should say that Zachary Oromo is conducting the BBC
Symphony
Orchestra.
He's a fabulous exponent of English music,
and indeed he's been in this series, Neil, before you.
Great.
Vaughan Williams, notoriously didn't like talking about his music, but he does put a quotation from Plato, the Greek philosopher Plato, talking about another philosopher, Socrates, at the top of the score, and it seems to be talking about the sort of survival of the soul being immortal. And let's not get too complicated about this, but we're talking about Vaughan Williams, who originally was certainly an atheist.
Yes. A
Perhaps
cheerful agnostic. I remember the
cheerful.
quote.
Eventually, it said he became a cheerful agnostic, but not an out and out Christian.
Yeah.
But for him to latch on without explanation to this idea of the survival of the soul, and I wonder how that relates to this, or whether indeed it relates to the Great War. I don't know.
The five is on two levels: the survival of the soul and the human spirit, and that's the individual. And then the survival of the human spirit as a human race, and that is the into the 1920s renewal after a Great War. So it's working on two levels, I would say. If you're looking at the human spirit, you're looking at the Whitman-esque ideas that I referenced briefly before, particularly the last movement of the C Symphony. O vast grandeur, and looking to that point that is ever continuing. And yes, in this period, Vaughan Williams was looking back to the Great War with the Pastoral Symphony, but it's not long after the G minor Mass as well, looking for some kind of restoration and renewal and continuity that is looking back a very long time. If you are looking back a very long time, then you are looking back at the human race that has survived goodness knows how many god-awful things.
I like the idea. I mean, I don't know how much time he spent there, but he certainly, it is said, started work on Sancta Civitas tucked away in Essex somewhere on his own in a rented property. And I've got this sort of image in my head of him saying, I want to get away from everything. I want to find a moment of calm, a period of calm, to let emotions settle in me and then express them in music. I mean, okay, that's fanciful perhaps, but that's not an unreasonable way of looking at it.
And the anger that this music isn't beyond anything that we've heard from Vaughan Williams before or after. It's not a completely new language for him, but you referenced the anger, or there's the more awkward language that we are being faced with in this piece. But the anger comes from within. The anger is personal, and to have some quiet time to express that. And the frustration and the rage that comes through at the most climactic moments can only really come from quiet.
Yeah, I don't know whether any of the singers in the chorus have actually done it before. Have they done it previously?
There will definitely have been one or two that will.
I'm just wondering how they've reacted to it. Whether it's the sort of piece where you start off thinking, "Ooh, that's a slightly strange language for us to be coping with," but then they warm to it as you move on.
Because there are moments of exquisite beauty, but actually it's so well written that actually the harmonic language isn't too difficult to grasp. I mean, I mentioned the wonky scales, but once you got the idea of it, it completely and utterly makes sense. With his immense skill as an orchestrator as well, the colours that are drawn up to illustrate the whole piece are fabulous. The darkness of the opening, the mysticism, where is this piece going to go to? That you're drawn in, but the colours of the orchestration are what you would expect from anybody who understands the wonderful colours from the C Symphony.
Yeah, well, look, we could talk forever about this, about a work that neither of us has known all that well before this point, but we must end it there. Perhaps one of my biggest takeaways from this interview is an expression that I will endeavour to use in my journalism as soon as possible, and that's wonky scales. I'll do my best to fit that in, Neil. But look, all the very best for the continuing preparations for this. I'm sure you'll be there at the first night, and I shall certainly be tuning in to hear how it actually goes. Neil Ferris, thank you so much for joining us.
That's a very great pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, it's a pleasure now to be speaking to the bass baritone soloist in this performance of Sancta Civitas, Gerald Finley. Thank you so much for joining us, Jerry. And I'm wondering, the offer arrives to sing Sancta Civitas in the first night of the Proms, and your reaction is what?
Count me in. Count me in. I mean,
Right.
that's even before really uh, you know, getting the score out and seeing what the challenges are. Look, to be part of a major work, a British work, of course. I've lived in Britain for 40 years or more now, in spite of my accent. And Vaughan Williams has been a huge part of my life, uh, both chorally and in song terms. And so therefore the reaction is yes. I mean, English, lovely, home turf, and one of the greatest festivals in the world to do it. Opening night, why not? I mean, no, this is absolutely, I'm on board. Yeah.
Yeah. So you refer there to your choral experience of Vaughan Williams, and that takes us back to King's College, Cambridge, where, of course, you were a choral scholar, and I guess you sang all sorts of Vaughan Williams there.
Oh, yes. And in fact, even before that, in Canada, when I was a boy chorister, Mr. Valiant-for-Truth, of course, was a real. Uh, Actually, I can remember the final phrases of, and all the trumpets shall sound for him on the other side. And as a young boy, I mean, that just those fanfare moments in the end of that piece was, uh, I mean, invigorating. I hadn't, that was, and of course then, but a lot of the hymn tunes, of course, that that I grew up with in the Anglican choral tradition that I had in Canada. I was very fortunate to be part of a men and boys sort of cathedral style choir in Ottawa. So he's been with me a very, very long time. And one of the very first songs and group of songs I ever sang were the songs of travel for young, newly changed voice baritone. They were really a helpful set to present and to work on. Again, the sort of the predilection for the easy tune, the folk song like thing. That's a very helpful thing for a singer when you don't have to kind of strain at a melody or feel you're trying to learn a tune. Vaughan Williams tunes are always incredibly singable. And I think most choral people would agree that the music itself is, you fit, within a very nicely tight harmonic structure, and very, very satisfying. And of course, many other works of his. I even as a young chorus member in Ottawa, Canada, 5 Tudor portraits were also part of. I was in the chorus of that. So I've had a lifelong relationship with him.
Yeah. So you made this offer, and you're thinking this is the first night of the Proms, which is a sort of celebratory night, not like the last night. Was there not part of you that said, "Oh, I wonder why this at the first night of the Proms? Is it appropriate?"
Well, yes. I mean, I think I think one of the reasons the Proms exists, I think Henry Wood had the ideas that celebrate British music, and I think the last time I did the first night of the Proms, I was fortunate enough to do it in 2012 as well. Was Elgar, and I think from that point of view, it's an opportunity for for the celebration specifically of the greatness of British music, and yeah, it's a natural fit. And the forces of the BBC Symphony, double choir, using even the acoustic of the Albert Hall. That there's an amazing part of a tenor soloist at the very end, of this particular piece, where it's a remote voice, and boy, is the Albert Hall ever designed for strategic placement of remote voices.
Yeah. So have you had any indication so far about how, I mean, it is a spatial work. Is there any sense that you've received so far of exactly how they're going to use the entirely appropriate space of the Albert Hall? Do you know?
No, I think that's going to be, up to our wonderful conductor, and presumably the logistics of the numbers of musicians involved. But certainly the organ, of course, is a main part of it as well. So we'll be spaced in appropriately around that. I'm hoping that I'm going to be downstage center, just as a narrator and sort of, prophet positioned. Who knows, though? I don't know. That's interesting. Maybe more theatrical than not.
It's intriguing to think about that. Well, of course, we know that it was completed in 1925, so that's another reason for doing it, I guess, although it wasn't performed first until the following year during the general strike, strangely enough. Jerry, I mean, I wonder how far you, in general, in your work, make a thing of looking at background to the writing of a piece of music, or do you just pick up the dots and say, I take this piece of music on its own terms and work at it that way?
Well, I think initially that's my way to go, is to just look at the music itself. It's fascinating, of course, to know back history and to know if there's any relationship with previous compositions. I know this was his first work since the choral work since the Mass in G, I think it was, and the Lark Ascending had been only presented a few years previous to that. He had been very busy during the war, of course. And that to me is interesting, because then you sort of think, well, why this piece? And what was his world vision at that point? There was a lot of hope, I think, in the early parts of the 20s. I think that just in terms of expectation that, yes, we'd seen the worst of humanity's conflict behind. Let's look forward. I mean, was it roaring that were the 20s roaring? I don't know, but in any case, there was a hopefulness and yeah, perhaps a new vision. And from that point of view, I mean, that's my role in this piece is really as a the utterer of a herald, really, and seeing what was going on, taken from the Book of Revelation, of course. But so yeah, I think the historic setting is important.
Yeah, well, of course, we get to the hope as the work progresses, but we do have to encounter the violence as well. And of course, that's one of the big technical challenges for you, pretty well near the start, actually coping with all that noise and trying to rise above it in a way.
Well, indeed, and I think in some ways I'm acutely aware that my ally is the conductor, keeping my voice, above the tumult. But the orchestra is very sensitive, and but again, of course, Vaughan Williams is often, loved voices so much, he knew that they should rise above. So my orchestration isn't so strong as to when then I hand over literally to the forces of the double choir, and that's helpful too. But yes, one wants to sing stentorian-like, particularly when they're singing Alleluia.
Well, the work was intended to be first performed, as far as the bass baritone solo is concerned, by Keith Faulkner, who was a director of the Royal College of Music, of which you are an alumnus. And
Yes.
did you ever actually meet him, a distinguished British singer?
I did. I had the great fortune of singing Delius's Seadrift at college in a performance, uh, which he attended. And the surprise to me was he came up to me afterwards and said, nice to have met you. Well done. It's a fiendish old piece, but well done. And the next thing I knew, a couple of days later, I had a note to collect a package from the porter's desk, and there was Sir Keith's personal copy, including all the orchestra parts of Bach's Ich habe genug, which I took as a great treasure. I still have, and
You do.
it was incredible to have those in my possession. Anyway, he had generously offered me that as a sort of a gift, just as a tie-up to my encounter with him was that I was then asked to sing indeed one movement of that at his memorial in Oxford. So it was an incredible relationship. So I'm delighted to know that his connection is maintained through this wonderful piece.
Well, lots of fascinating thoughts there from you. Thank you very much indeed, Gerald Finley. We wish you all the very best for this first night of the Proms performance. All of us will be glued to it. We must hear it live. We'll be glued to it. But thank you so much for your time.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.